What's going on, guys? My name is Matt, and recently I was given the opportunity to try out the relatively new NVIDIA RTX 4070 Ti Super, a card with a ridiculous name, ridiculous performance, and a ridiculous price tag to match. So I decided to put together a high-end gaming PC with the 4070 Ti Super to answer the question of whether or not I think this card is worth it at this staggering price of $800. Because this is such a powerful card, I wanted to pair it with other high-end parts and ended up putting together the PC you're looking at right now with a total price tag of around $1,800. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the parts that make up this high-end gaming beast, starting with the CPU. The CPU I went with is a pretty obvious choice for any high-end system whose main focus is gaming, and that's the AMD Ryzen 7 7800X3D. This is an 8-core CPU with 16 threads and boost speeds of up to 5 GHz. This chip uses AMD's 3D V-Cache, which allows it to have an impressive 96 MB of L3 cache, which is part of why this chip is so good for gaming. Beyond this, the 7800X3D doesn't run as hot as a lot of modern processors, meaning cooling won't be a big issue or focal point. While the CPU is definitely best suited for gaming, it's still going to give enough multi-thread performance for workstation applications like editing, especially if it's just something you do infrequently on the side. At the current going rate of around $280, the 7800X3D is offering a good amount of value for the money and is actually pretty affordable for what is considered the best gaming CPU on the market. To cool our CPU, I knew I didn't need anything crazy like a 360mm AIO, but I still wanted to get something pretty capable. After looking at all the options, I decided to go with the Deepcool AK620 Zero Dark Edition. At the current sale price of around $60, the AK620 is offering a lot of cooling performance with a dual tower design, tons of copper heat pipes, and two 120mm fans. This offers more than enough cooling performance for the 7800X3D while staying extremely quiet. And if you're interested in temps, you'll be able to see those later in the benchmark section of the video. Overall, I really like this cooler, and I actually use the white version in my personal rig. Moving on to the motherboard, I splurged a little bit in this category and ended up going with the Gigabyte B650 Aorus Elite AX. This is an ATX motherboard with a ton of features and a price tag of $200. This board has solid VRMs, 4 DIMM slots, 3 M.2 slots, and plenty of PCIe expansion. The neutral black color scheme allows it to fit in a lot of different builds, and one of the biggest selling points to me is the back panel I/O. It has built-in Wi-Fi, 2.5 gigabit LAN, a BIOS flash button, and 12 USB ports, which I don't know about you, but to me is music to my ears. Overall, this board is slightly overkill, but I think it's a very solid pick and I can highly recommend it. For the system memory, I went relatively basic with a 32GB kit of G.Skill Ripjaws RAM. This is DDR5 memory running at 6000 MHz CL36. At around $100, this kit is a decent value per dollar and definitely gets the job done. 32GB should be more than enough for a gaming system like this one, but the cool thing is that this kit is only taking up 2 of the 4 DIMM slots, meaning upgrading to 64GB of RAM in the future would be as easy as popping in 2 more 16GB sticks. Moving on to storage, I went with one of my favorite high-end drives, which is the Solidim P44 Pro 1TB, which currently comes in at around $90. This is a very high-performing and reliable SSD that trades blows with some of the most high-end drives on the market. It's great for an OS drive, and 1TB should be plenty of space to start off with. With that being said, if more storage is needed in the future, then the system will support 2 more M.2 drives and up to 6 SATA drives for an incredible amount of storage upgrade options. Next up, let's talk about the GPU, which in this case is the Asus TUF version of the NVIDIA RTX 4070 Ti Super, a card with a ridiculous name but also ridiculous performance. At around $800, this card is very expensive, but the performance it offers is considered worth it to many. This Asus TUF version is built like a tank with a triple fan design and mostly metal build. It uses the dumb 16-pin connector, and like all 4070 Ti Supers, offers 16GB of video memory, which is more than enough for even 4K gaming in almost all instances. At this price price point, the main competitor is the AMD RX 7900 XT, which costs about $100 less, slightly outperforms the 4070 Ti Super in pure rasterization, and has 4 extra gigabytes of video memory. With that being said, going Nvidia does give you the benefit of being able to take advantage of better ray tracing, DLSS 3, frame generation, and anecdotally more stable drivers. In terms of performance, this card is great at 1440p and 4K gaming. It's definitely disappointing that a 70 series card now commands an $800 price tag, but I guess that's just how it is. In 2024, where building a high-end gaming PC means spending half your budget on the graphics card alone. I'll be showing temps and performance along with some more discussion on this card in a few minutes. But for now, let's move on to the power supply. With an estimated power usage of around 560 watts, this is a moderately power-hungry system, and with such high-end components, we definitely want a solid power supply. What I ended up going with is the Corsair RM750. This is a modular 80+ gold rated unit with plenty of power headroom for this system and nice all-black cables. I used the older version in this build, but I'll link the newer RM750E, which is the updated version and which comes in at right around $100. I think this is a good match for this build, and it should provide plenty of clean, reliable power for the foreseeable future. Finally, for the case, I decided to go with the Corsair 4000X RGB in white, which currently comes in at $120. It is actually right around $100 for the black version, which many of you may prefer. I went with the white to have a white, black, and gray color scheme, which I think looks pretty good, but I wouldn't blame you if you think it would look better with all black. This is an ATX mid-tower case with 3 included RGB fans, a power supply basement, and a ton of dust filters. Beyond this, it's super easy to build in with plenty of room for cable management. Airflow is also pretty good, even with there being a front glass panel, which again, you'll be able to see temps in the benchmark section of the video. All in all, for $1,800, the system is offering a lot of features and performance. With that being said, there are a million ways you could have gone with it, so if you were building a 4070 Ti Super gaming PC around this price, let me know what parts you would have went with in the comment section below. So now that you have an understanding of why I built this PC and all the parts in it, it's now time to talk about how it performs in a bunch of games. I tried to test a relatively wide variety of games, but if there's a title you'd like to see me test in the future, leave your suggestions in the comments below. I also tested everything at 1440p and 4K so you could see the performance difference. So without further ado, here are the gaming benchmarks. So let's start things off with a game that's been stirring up a lot of controversy lately but is extremely popular, which is Helldivers 2. Starting things off at 1440p ultra settings, hopping into a mission, I saw an average of 98 FPS with 1% lows of 88. This is solid performance in my opinion, but 1440p 144Hz should be doable on this machine if you play around with the settings. Bumping the resolution up to 4K ultra settings, this PC was able to output a 57 FPS average with 1% lows of 54. 4K ultra settings with nearly 60 FPS is pretty impressive in my opinion. Moving on to an older AAA title, Borderlands 3, I test this game using the built-in benchmark, and at 1440p ultra settings, this PC output a 145 FPS average with 1% lows of 117, which I think is quite good. Bumping the resolution up to 4K again at ultra settings, this PC was able to put out an 80 FPS average with 1% lows of 70. Again, I think this performance is great. Next up is Cyberpunk 2077, which I tested using the built-in benchmark and the ultra preset without any ray tracing. At 1440p, this test resulted in a 116 FPS average with 1% lows of 88, which is honestly higher than I thought it was going to be. Going up to 4K again using the ultra preset resulted in a 55 FPS average with 1% lows of 45. Moving on to an esports title, I tested Rainbow Six Siege using the built-in benchmark, and at 1440p ultra settings, this PC produced a 433 FPS average with 1% lows of 352, which is way more FPS than you'll ever need and shows that a PC like this is incredibly overkill for Rainbow Six. Going up to 4K again at ultra settings produced a 257 FPS average with 1% lows of 221, again which is ridiculously high. Now let's go too far Far Cry 6, which I tested using the built-in benchmark and in 1440p ultra settings, resulted in a 159 FPS average with 1% lows of 127. Bumping the resolution up to 4K again at ultra resulted in a 95 FPS average with 1% lows of 82. Overall, this is very solid performance in Far Cry 6. Next up is Rust, which I use the settings it defaulted me to, which are on the screen right now. I'm not sure if these are optimal, but I hopped onto a random server and just ran up and down a road to test performance. At 1440p, I saw a 203 FPS average with 1% lows of 75, which I think is pretty impressive and should be enough FPS for competitive play. Going up to 4K at the same settings resulted in a 111 FPS average with 1% lows of 55. This again seems to be pretty solid performance. Moving on to Valorant, I probably shouldn't have tested this, but I was just curious as to how ridiculously high the FPS would be. At 1440p, this PC put out an insane average of 794 FPS with 1% lows of 441, again showing you probably shouldn't be buying such a high-end PC if you only play games like Valorant. Going up to 4K, the average FPS dropped to 530 and the 1% lows to 336, which again is just ridiculously high. I was even tempted to test this game at 1080p just to see how high the FPS would go, but decided to just move on to the next game. For the final game, I tested Fortnite, which surprisingly was the game that actually performed the worst. I tested at the Epic preset with 100% resolution scaling, which is definitely far from competitive settings, but I didn't think it would be as tough to run as it was. At 1440p, I saw a 61 FPS average with 1% lows of 50. Going up to 4K, again at the Epic preset, the system only managed to output a 37 FPS average with 1% lows of 34. Overall, performance on this system is great, but let's talk about temps and noise for a minute. Temperature-wise, both the CPU and GPU stayed surprisingly cool, with neither of them going above the 70-degree mark, and you can always go back to the gameplay clips to see temps in specific games. In terms of noise, the PC was very quiet, which was great. So now let's get back to the question of whether or not I think the 4070 Ti Super is worth it at this large price tag. I think if you've got money to blow, game at 1440p and like to max out the settings and want to go with Nvidia, I think the 4070 Ti Super is a solid option. If you're okay with AMD and don't care about stuff like DLSS and frame generation, then I think you're probably better off saving $100 and going with the RX 7900 XT. If you want to max out the latest games at 4K, the 4070 Ti Super does a pretty good job, but you may want to consider spending a little more on something like a 4080 Super. Overall, the 4070 Ti Super is a powerful card with a hefty price tag, but I think given its performance and the current market, you could make a case for it. With all this being said, don't feel like you need to spend $800 on a graphics card. The reality is you could spend $800 total on a system and still get a very good 1080p gaming experience. I'm definitely disappointed at the trend of GPUs getting so expensive, but the unfortunate reality is that with Nvidia's big shift to AI, it means they have less and less incentive every day now to appeal to gamers and offer competitive pricing. But who knows what the future will hold. So yeah guys, I think this wraps this video up. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more PC and tech related content in the future. And as always, this is Matt from Tech by Matt, signing out.